right. Well, we are back. Make sure my mic is not muted there. Okay. And we are going to be jumping into our first session on Revelation 14. And we've got a ton of ground to cover. So I'm going to go through a quick review as absolutely fast as I can. We have been in what is called the parenthetical chapters, screen on the board in-house. The parenthetical chapters consist of chapters 10 through 14, so obviously we are hitting the end of this section. The story so far, of course, if we review your homework, and this will kind of be your ongoing homework as well, read Revelation 14, 15, and 16. But for the previous weeks, you were supposed to take a look at chapter 14 and pay attention to the return of the 144,000. This is the second time that we are seeing them in the book. And pay attention to a character that could be called the Cloud Rider. We'll see him very shortly. And then what three things do the angels proclaim? In fact, we're going to even divvy up the angels in an even better way. And what is the significance of the harvest in this chapter? It's very important that we do not get confused about what this harvest is dealing with. So we have taken a look at now throughout the last many chapters the Revelation narrative, and where have we been? Well, starting on the left, you have what is called the harpazo, or that's Greek. We would take it from the Latin, the rapture. The Christian church caught up to meet Jesus in the air. And then we propose a gap of an indeterminate period of time wherein the last birth pangs of the beginning of sorrows take place. And then what is called the 70th week of Daniel, the time of Jacob's trouble, or as most people think of it, the Great Tribulation, a 7-year period of time consisting of 3.5 years of a false peace and 3.5 years of true tribulation. Starting in Revelation chapter 6 with the 5-sealed scroll being opened, we see the 6 seals opened, the first 4 of which are what are known as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, followed by martyrs and cosmic changes. From there, we enter that tribulation period and we have the 7 trumpet judgments. And then between trumpet 6 and 7, there is a parenthesis. That is where we are at now. We will very soon be entering the last half of that period, what is the 7 bowl or 7 vial judgments. And then will come the second coming of Christ. Smack dab in the middle of this, we see the death of the 2 witnesses in Revelation 11 and the abomination of desolation spoken of by Jesus in Matthew 24. This parenthesis that we are in right there is Revelation 10 through 14. So that is kind of where we're at. And Revelation 14 is basically a prelude to the bowls starting. The beginning of the bowls blowing took place in Revelation 11, but then nothing happens. There's all of this other information that is covered. But in these next sessions that we'll have on this chapter, we're specifically going to be dealing with what we could subtitle the harvest of harm, or the ingathering of injustice. This is a very different type of harvest. It's important that we keep that in view. This isn't a revival that we're talking about here. Let's take a look at the outline of the chapter and kind of get our footing. So, verses 1 through 5 of chapter 14, we are going to see the Lamb and the 144,000. And we have not seen the 144,000, 12,000 sealed from each of the 12 tribes of Israel since Revelation chapter 11. So this is their second appearance. But then the rest of this chapter, and you may not even realize this when you do your homework and you read it, but what it really becomes is the proclamations of 7 angels. And ever since we started our series on Revelation, we have talked about the fact that there are 7s all throughout the Bible. 7 letters, 7 churches, 7 lampstands, 7 stars. Some of them are right in the text. You can see them. Seven seals, 7 trumpets, 7 vials. Blatantly obvious. Then some, we've shown you 7 openings that are in the book. And here's 7 angelic proclamations that you may not have even noticed unless you took the time to count. Verses 6 through 7 deal with the first angel's proclamation. Verse 8, the second angel's proclamation. Verses 9 through 11, the third angel's proclamation. Verses 12 through 13 is the patience and blessing of the saints. So in Revelation 13, we had a break for what was kind of a dire warning. Here in Revelation 14, we take a little break and we have kind of a promise that exists in the middle of the book. And then, verses 14 through 16, we have reaping the earth's harvest and reaping the grapes of wrath. And the remaining angels, you'll see they are in there as we go, but I didn't quite want to spoil the surprise as it unfurls. So, we will see these 7 angels that are in view with the eternal gospel, the doom of Babylon, the fury on beast worshipers. The 4th angel, people don't even recognize it, is kind of a voice that speaks from heaven about the righteous dead. And then the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th angel all have to do with that grape harvest that is near the end of the book there. So let's talk now about the Lamb and the 144,000, as it were. Revelation 14, verse 1. It says, "Then I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads." Where have we heard this thing about things being written on the foreheads before? Notice that it's not 143,999. Since we last saw them in Revelation chapter 7, no matter all of the nonsense that has been going on, not one has been lost. Not one. They have come through the tribulation miraculously, just like the 3 Hebrews in Daniel 3 that went into Nebuchadnezzar's fiery furnace. Now, by the way, a great little picture of the rapture in the Old Testament there is, where's Daniel in that story? It was Daniel and his 3 friends through the book of Daniel until then, but then it's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace. Where's Daniel? Is he sleeping? He's just mysteriously absent, as if he's been removed from the equation for that particular story. Why didn't he have to risk bowing before that idol? Cool little picture hidden in Scripture. Don't got to make too much about it. Notice that the saints here are standing with him on Mount Zion. We think of heaven as a remote place, somewhere far off, but it seems more likely that it is another dimension that is an unseen part of our present existence, not necessarily removed from us. And who preserves us even today? Jesus Christ. Not methods, not programs, but a person is who saves and sanctifies us. So even as we go through these sessions, it's necessary just to ask you to pause and consider, when is the last time you just thanked him for what he's done for you? So Zion, the city of God. Interestingly, this is the only mention of Zion in Revelation. The only time the term comes up. Its history is well storied throughout the Bible. David captured it from the Jebusites in 2 Samuel 5, 6 through 7. And the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who spoke to David, saying, "You shall not come in here, but the blind and the lame will repel you." That's a heck of an insult. Thinking David cannot come in here. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is, the city of David. We see that this city that pagans never thought the Israelites would capture becomes what is called a cup of trembling in Zechariah 12. In fact, we're going to see it rendered a little bit differently because that comes out of the King James. The New King James calls it, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples. when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem, and it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone, or the King James says a burdensome stone, for all peoples, all who would heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, though all nations of the earth are gathered against it. Now, take the time to think about that for a second. Jerusalem becomes the focus, and we see it here focused on in Revelation 14. Jerusalem is in a seaport. It doesn't have any trading value. It's not even the capital of Israel, or it is their capital, I apologize. It is their recognized capital in Israel, but the world doesn't even recognize it as their capital. Only in recent years has that started to happen. Thank God President Trump did that. Most of them look at it as Tel Aviv, so they're not even concerned with it from that standpoint. And yet, news media outlets have more foreign correspondents in Israel than in any other city of the world, or in Jerusalem than in any other city in the world. It is a cup of drunkenness. It is a cup of trembling. The world is focused on what happens in that city that is of no material wealth. It's not even truly that big. Even now, it's Satan's focus. Even Islam ignored it until Israel regained it. And Psalms 2, 5 through 6 says this. It says, then he shall speak to them in his wrath and distress them in his deep displeasure. Yet I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion. See, the promise is the king that will rule the world is going to rule the world from Zion. The capital of the world will be Jerusalem. And the devil and all his minions don't want to see that happen. There are two cities in focus, and as we move forward, you will see that Babylon is the chief city of the enemy. The city of God versus the city of the world. And I submit to you, even though I haven't proven the case yet, that Babylon is yet future. It's in ruins now, but it is yet future. Let's not take it symbolically. This is just something for your own personal study time. I'm not going to go into it in depth, but again, we'll have this up in the comments. You'll be able to grab this. The image is of an ancient lute player, or harp player. There are 30 psalms that use that phrase Zion within it. Psalm 20 may be speaking of the deliverance of the 144,000 from tribulation. Psalm 48 may be speaking of kings of the earth gathered, or the woman in travail. 74 speaks of purchased singers. 76, cutting off the kings of the earth. 102 seems to speak of a set time that is to come. 110 talks about Melchizedek, a rod to rule and a right hand. Is that speaking prophetically of Jesus? 132, verses 13, 14, 17, 18, the Lord has chosen Zion. 133, Israel is united. Both Hermon and the north of Mount Zion are brought together instead of divided as they were when many of the Psalms were written. 137 says Babylon must be destroyed. That's prophesied in Revelation 14:8 coming up. 146, trust not in princes, the Son of Man. And 149 uses the phrase Zion and even talks about vengeance upon the nations. Is this all Old Testament prophecy relating to what we're going to read about upcoming in Revelation 14? It's worth your time to go through and kind of study it out. Isaiah 2:2 says, now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of mountains and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Verse 3, many people shall come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. That's a heck of a prophetic statement. Verse 4. It says, he shall judge between the nations and rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And Micah, chapter 4, verses 1 through 3, echoes this almost verbatim, but then adds in the 4th and 5th verses, but everyone shall sit under his vine and under his fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. For all people walk each in the name of his God, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. Considering what you're about to read in Revelation 14, those are some hefty statements. And this goes back to some concepts that I started to introduce in the last session, that it is highly likely that the map has yet to be redrawn. We're going to be studying what future maps may look like as we go forward. Let's look at Revelation 14, verse 2. It says, I heard a voice from heaven like the voice of many waters and like the voice of loud thunder, and I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. 14 verse 3 says, they sang as it were a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders, and no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. Do another study of Psalms. You'll see that Psalm 33:3, 43, 96:1, 98:1, 107:1 and verse 2, 144:9, 149:1, they all mention the new song. Do they say things that link us to what we're reading now? Fun studies to do on your own. Verse 4. These are the ones who are not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being firstfruits to God and to the Lamb. So what does this mean? Is this calling this 144,000 literal or figurative? We could take it to mean literal from the standpoint that as Jeremiah began his prophetic ministry, Jeremiah 16:1 through 4, he's forbidden to marry. Jesus gives his warning in Matthew 24:19, saying, woe to those who are with child or give suck in those days. So it is possible that they choose not to marry simply because the days of the tribulation, they're taking Jesus at his word. This could slow things down. It could also be figurative because idolatry equals, throughout the Old Testament, spiritual fornication or spiritual adultery. And you can see that in Ezekiel 16. The church is called a chaste virgin to Christ in Ephesians 5:26 through 27. And Jezebel is a harlot, 2 Corinthians 11:2. So food for thought there. The point is that they keep themselves for the Lord alone. And this fact that they are first fruits. How are they first fruits? Some commentators say, see, this must have happened in like 70 AD, because they couldn't possibly be first fruits if there's been Christians for millennia. But remember, this is a different set. If the church has been raptured, and this is a group of tribulation saints, back in Revelation chapter 7, the 144,000 are sealed before a great revival breaks out in the balance of that chapter. It makes perfect sense to say that the 144,000 are the first fruits of that coming end times revival of tribulation saints. So don't let them fool you on that. Israel will enjoy a unique role in the millennial kingdom. And these, in fact, these 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes may be the brethren that Jesus talks about in the sheep and goat judgment of Matthew 25 that gets misused on Christmas cards all the time. Those verses that say, whenever you were naked and fed me, whenever I was hungry and you clothed me. And they say, Lord, when were you naked and we fed you? When were you hungry? Etc., etc. And he says, whenever you did that to these, my brethren. People like to say that's to the poor and everybody in need today. Jesus is possibly speaking specifically to how the nations treated the faithful Jewish remnant during the tribulation period. And yet we put it on all of our Christmas cards. Revelation 14, verse 5. It says, and in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. These are set apart because they don't believe the lie. 2 Thessalonians 2:11 through 12 clearly shows us that the beast is a liar. It says, for this reason God will send them, those that are in the world, strong delusion, that they should believe the lie, that they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. You can see that the world will fall, and that's what leads us to 2 seals. At the end of Revelation 13, we saw that those that worship the beast are sealed with his mark on their forehead or on their right hand, but these 144,000 are sealed with the name of God on their forehead. It is in view, prior to this foreboding harvest, that some are branded as authentic and the rest are branded as fake. Not only is there a real God and a real lamb, but there is a false lamb and a false worshipers of the lamb. And at no point in world history will this division be more stark or transparent than at this moment in history. Let's talk about this next segment here, the proclamation of the 3 angels. Revelation 14:6 says, "Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people." So here we have the first of a series of 7 angelic proclamations. And we'll put this slide up so you can read it as we go. I apologize for it not quite fitting on the slide there. But today, the gospel of grace is proclaimed by men. Tomorrow, in the future, at this time, it will be proclaimed by indestructible angels. Even the 2 witnesses were killed for the gospel, but angels will not be. Verse 7 says, "Saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the honor of his judgment, the hour, of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water." There will always be other gospels. There is difficulty finding the true gospel in many of today's mega pulpits. False gospels are warned about in 2 Corinthians and in Galatians. But Gabriel announces the true gospel at the birth of John the Baptist in Luke 1. The angelic host announces it to the shepherds in Luke 2. The news of the spiritual growth at the church of Thessalonica is reported by Paul as the sweetness of the gospel, 1 Thessalonians 3:6. The 7th angel talks about the mystery of God will be finished. We see that discussed in Revelation 10:7. And of course, Jesus says that there is a preaching of the kingdom in Matthew 24 that will go out to every tribe, every tongue, every nation. And oftentimes, people think that that means before Jesus can return, all of every nation has to be preached the gospel by men. But what we just saw in Revelation 14 was this angel is given the everlasting gospel. And before the final harvest of harm, before the harvest of injustice, before the 7 bowl judgments begins, which is really the end, that gospel will be sent out. It may be a completely misconstrued view of Scripture to assume that we on this planet have to deliver the gospel to every tribe, nation, and tongue before Jesus can return, because the rapture has no prerequisites. He can come back at any moment. What Jesus is talking about in Matthew 24:14 can correspond to the gospel being proclaimed by this angel to the entire world prior to the last judgments of the tribulation. Does that make sense? Totally different than how most people think about it, but biblically accurate. Here's one of the other things you need to realize. The real gospel is creation-oriented. There are tons of Christians today that say you don't have to have a literal view of Genesis in order to believe the gospel. It's not specifically necessary for a good salvation doctrine. But in Revelation, you saw that they're to worship the God who made heaven and earth. That's what Revelation 14 just said. This is the Bible declaring if you don't have Genesis right, you can't get John 3:16 right. If you can't get Genesis right, you can't get Romans 9 and 10 right. you will not understand why things went down the way they had to go down on this planet if you truly don't understand what happened in Genesis 1, Genesis 2, Genesis 3. That's why we spent so much time in our series, Legends of the Fall, to make that make sense, because the whole plot of the entire Bible is in those 3 chapters. Okay? Creation is absolutely imperative. It is the arrogance of anti-God science that we have to fight against. And maybe you didn't know this, but Johann Kepler, he said that he could see the divine mathematician whose mind could be discovered in the precise mechanics of the universe. Or Sir Isaac Newton wrote of the divine presence who set the universe in motion. Every secular physicist in the world today believes in Newtonian mechanics. He says, this most beautiful system of the sun, planet, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of the intelligent and powerful being. Note this, Isaac Newton also wrote over 1 million words of biblical commentary, and all of his views took the Bible literally, in a day and an age when that was most often not the case. Revelation 14:8. And another angel followed, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So, we come now to the second angelic proclamation. The first was the gospel. The second is the proclamation of Babylon fallen. This is the first mention of Babylon in Revelation, but it will take center stage in chapters 17 and 18. Babylon is Satan's headquarters. It is the worship of Semiramis, the female principal deity and the fountainhead of false religion. And she takes her final personification in the woman who rides the beast. Jeremiah 15:6 says, Flee from the midst of Babylon, and everyone save his life. Do not be cut off in her iniquity, for this is the time of the Lord's vengeance. He shall recompense her. Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunk. The nations drank her wine, therefore the nations are deranged. Babylon has suddenly fallen and been destroyed. Wail for her, take balm for her pain. Perhaps she may be healed. We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Forsake her, and let us go everyone to his own country, for her judgment reaches the heaven and is lifted up to the skies. And the harlot that we see in Babylon is holding a golden cup. The imagery is the same. We'll get to this more detail later on, but it is important to recognize that there is a prophetic fate for the city of man, Babylon, that has not been fulfilled. I encourage you to look at this chart on your own time, study the verses that are there, because there are many prophecies that describe the destruction of Babylon. But when Babylon fell historically, it was taken without a fight. Cyrus took it without a fight. The Bible means what it says and says what it means, and therefore people who try to say that in end times prophecy Babylon is really Rome, or I know people who try to say that Babylon is the American country or the United States of America or Washington, D.C., I submit to you that Babylon is Babylon is Babylon. If the Arabs could build Dubai in a couple of decades and turn it into a paradise, they can rebuild the city of Babylon like that. Don't underestimate prophecy. Charging ahead. It says, Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink the wine of the wrath of God. Does that sound like the Jeremiah portion we just read? Which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. Tormented. Here we have the third angel. The first is the gospel. The second is the proclamation of the destruction of Babylon. And the third is a warning. It is a warning about a fatal choice regarding the mark of the beast. In fact, the mark of the beast is just described in Revelation 13. It's not until we get all the way here in Revelation 14 that somebody's actually saying, don't take the mark. Notice this is not for the church. The church has been removed. These saints, Matthew 24:13, are said to have to endure to the end in this period. Look at this verse. But he who endures till the end shall be saved, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Now that we've gone through everything we've gone through, don't you think the people who, I'm all for missions. They use Matthew 24 as a reason to go out and preach the gospel. We can use the Great Commission. We're told to go and to make disciples of all nations, right? But this is not a prerequisite to Jesus coming back. Because the Father himself has already proclaimed that the gospel will in fact be preached, and it's not dependent on human beings because we're told an angel's going to do it. As a witness to all the nations. Nobody will have any excuse. Because God is a good God. And then the end will come. Well, what's the end? The end is what lies ahead of us in Revelation. We started with the beginning of sorrows. We're now approaching the end of sorrows. These last set, remember I told you when we were in the trumpet judgments, you ain't seen nothing yet. We got through the first woe and the second woe in Revelation chapter 8 and chapter 9. And when we read about that second woe, it says, but behold, Matt's paraphrase here, but it says, hold on to your shorts, baby, because the next one is, whoo! The end is coming. Revelation 14:11 says, and the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever. Everybody say forever and ever. And they have no rest day or night who worship the beast and his image and whoever receives the mark of his name. This is important. Only you can prevent forever fires. Some of you get that on the way home. This punishment is eternal. It's described as an ages of ages. It's referenced 12 times in Revelation, 8 times to the glory of the Father in Christ, 3 times the duration of the punishment of the devil and who are his, and 1 time right here as the punishment for people who insist on following the devil. Matthew 13, verse 36 and following says, then Jesus sent the multitude away and went into the house, and his disciples came to him, saying, explain to us the parable of the tares of the field. He answered and said to them, he who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seeds are the sons of the kingdom, but the tares are the sons of the wicked one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil, and the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Every time you read this parable, you need to go and read Revelation 14 along with it. Because they are this. Lock, sync. Therefore, as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of this age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and those who practice lawlessness, and will cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So here we see fire. Is this fire symbolic or literal? Mercy cannot be mixed with judgment. The literalness of hell is a serious issue which many Christians seek to avoid. Psalm 75:8 says, "For in the hand of the Lord there is a cup, and the wine is red. It is fully mixed, and he pours it out. Surely its dregs shall all the wicked of the earth drain and drink down." We are building to the end of Revelation 14, which is a harvest of what is called the grapes of wrath. And yet I've shown you in Jeremiah, I've shown you in Isaiah, I've shown you in the Psalms that this same imagery was happening then, and it is culminating now. Does anybody get the sense of excitement? Like we are on the precipice. Habakkuk 3:2 says, "O Lord, I have heard your speech and was afraid. O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy." So we have to deal with this now. Because if we deal with this now, we are out of here. We don't have to deal with the bloodshed that is coming. And my friends, as you're going to see at the end of this chapter, the bloodshed that is coming isn't bloodshed brought on by the enemy. It isn't bloodshed that is brought on by evil people on this planet. That's all going to happen before this. The bloodshed that is coming is the bloodshed of the Messiah coming back to take what's his from those who don't deserve it. And it's messy. Grace and mercy are now. Judgment is tomorrow. Get it right now. The 7 bowls are coming. So the doctrine of endless punishment. In Revelation, the good news is linked. Oh, never mind that. Salvation supposes a prior damnation. In order to escape danger, one must believe in the danger. There's 2 errors that can be made when it comes to the doctrine of hell. One is universalism, and the other is annihilationism. Universalism is the belief that ultimately everybody gets saved because God is too good and too merciful to condemn anybody to hell. Annihilationism is the belief that God doesn't really send people to eternal punishment, but their lives and their eternal beings are extinguished by they just cease to exist. Both are biblical heresies. Universalism blots out the attribute of retributive justice. It makes sin nothing more than misfortune. It turns all suffering into chastisement. That's where this comes from. It relegates the sacrifice of Christ into simple moral influence and makes it a debt due to man instead of an unmerited boon from God. Throughout the Bible, we see God's love and grace freely available to all who will accept it. The entire Bible is a record of the extremes he has gone to in order to allow us to avoid the destiny of our fallen state. And even in the end times, when the church is gone, 144,000 are sealed. They become witnesses through the tribulation of God's goodness and lead the largest revival we have ever seen. Then God sends 2 witnesses that proclaim the truth, do signs and wonders, and people kill them. And then God resurrects them as if that won't make them believe. And then, as if that's not enough, God sends out an angel to proclaim the gospel one last time to every tribe, tongue, nation, and country on the planet. In this parenthesis, before judgment falls. That's on top of sending his son to die. That's on top of this prophetic witness that we are in right now, showing you how hard God is trying to get people to say, do it my way now, because I don't want to have to do what comes next. Nobody can call God unjust. How much more could he do? But people's response is, no, God, I don't want to love you. I want to run things my own way. And see, the Bible talks about two deaths. And we'll see this more as we get to the end of Revelation. It literally speaks of a first and a second death. The first death is physical death. That's separation from the soul from the body. Spiritual death is the separation of the soul from the Spirit of God Himself. According to Scripture, it seems, Revelation 20, verse 13, Acts 24, 15, that the unsaved are resurrected with a body prepared for eternity, just as we that are saved are. These bodies are prepared for an eternal fate. But ultimately, it is we ourselves who choose whether or not God will judge us. It is we ourselves who decide either to accept or refuse His grace, His love, His forgiveness. It is we ourselves who choose everlasting life or everlasting death. And some people who believe in annihilationism, they will sit there and say, but it's not eternal. I don't know how that makes it better. I think if you're still forced between the choice of existing in eternity with God and getting to know all the secrets of the universe and be loved and exist in a place where there will be no more tears and be with your loved ones and have many mansions and all the good things that are promised, that sounds better than simply ceasing to exist. And they would argue that it does. But they try to soften the blow of hell. You only need one verse to refute them. One. I'm going to make it so easy. You ready? Matthew 25:46. It says, and these, by the context, Jesus is referencing the wicked, will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into everlasting or eternal life. Annihilationists like to argue that the word in Greek that means everlasting doesn't necessarily mean forever and forever, but except based on all the other scriptures that talk about everlasting life, and annihilationists believe in everlasting life in heaven, in this one verse, they're juxtaposed against each other. You can't have the word mean eternal life in one phrase and everlasting punishment that isn't really everlasting in the other phrase. They're set against each other here. You need one verse. Jesus lined it up for you. He served it up as a softball. If everlasting life means everlasting life, then everlasting punishment has to mean everlasting punishment, because that's the context in which He's saying. You with me? Only you can prevent forever fires. Try to finish this segment. We're almost there. Revelation 14:12 says, here is the patience of the saints. This is where we hit that little break. Remember I said there was going to be that pause? The pause in Revelation 13 was a warning. And it was the warning that said, remember, those who live by the sword must die by the sword. Remember? That was after he got done describing the beast and all the horrible things that the beast would do and all the persecutions that would come upon the believers because of the beast. And people take that verse out of context too. What Jesus was saying was, don't worry. This guy who lives by the sword, he must die by the sword. That was a promise to the saints. Don't worry, he thinks he's all that, but he's going down. So here in Revelation 14, we have a similar little pause, and there's a promise. Listen to this. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, this is the fourth angel, this voice from heaven, write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works follow them. Yeah, this beast may take you out. Yeah, you may have to stand virginal spiritually, virginal literally. You may have to endure to the end, but if you die in me, you're blessed. It goes hand in hand with that blessing and warning from Revelation 13. Don't worry. He thinks he's Barney bad, but he's going down. Here's the promise. You endure in me, and you will rest from your labors. If you die in me, you'll be free. See, even after the gospel goes out, the promise is, yes, you're going to suffer right now. Yes, you're in hardship. Yes, it's going to be hard. You won't be able to take that mark. You may not be able to buy and trade. You may starve. You may be martyred. Your head may get cut off. But if you die in me, I got you for eternity. I don't know about you. I'm going to take him up on it right now. I don't want to go through all that. But how sweet is our God that he still has the back for those that missed the first train out of Dodge. So that is the fourth angel. It's a strange assurance saying from now on. And that reassurance is only relevant if they feel they have missed the resurrection. For the church that's on the ground, we're promised we're going to be met to caught up in the air. How is that promise of that voice relevant to somebody who thinks they still might be raptured out? It's not. But if there was an event that took place where Christians disappeared and you didn't get to go, that becomes a heck of a promise, because it says, don't worry, from now on, if you die in me, I'm going to make it okay. Do you understand the context? That little verse in and of itself is a sign of the rapture, because what good is it if we're still down on the ground and we believe that a rapture could still yet happen? This was the anxiety of the Thessalonians when the Roman persecutions under Nero began, and it led Paul to write what he wrote in 1 Thessalonians 4:13. But I do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep, lest you sorrow as others who have no hope. Philippians 1:23 says, for I am hard pressed between the two, having a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to remain in the flesh is more needful for you. And being confident of this, I know that I shall remain and continue with you for all your progress and joy of faith, that your rejoicing for me may be more abundant in Jesus Christ by my coming to you again. Paul stuck around even though he wanted to go be with the Master. He's in heaven right now, and I know that he's watching, and he's probably grieved by people who aren't finding Christ as their Savior now. But how unique must it be to look into the eyes of the Master and realize that mercy is still at the forefront of his thought before judgment comes. What lies ahead? The earth's harvest, the harvest of harm, and the grapes of wrath, which we will tackle next time.